Happy Sunday. Today, I hope everyone is doing as well as can be expected. Today, I'm going in a different direction. I'm a little bit heavy, or feeling a little bit heavy from the events with Ray Shard, but I really want to talk about then this notion of policing or police reform. I will just say I don't believe that police reform is even a real option. I don't think it's a viable option. I don't think it will really and truly change anything in regards to what our actual problem is. So policing and the targeting and killing and terrorizing of Black people is a symptom of an infestation of racism and hierarchical and patriarchal beliefs in this nation. Once, I remember, well, not once, but I've heard the statement that Angela Davis made that said, we have to talk about liberating minds before we can talk about liberating people. And I think that is so relevant today, in that we could change policies, we could eliminate chokeholds, we can eliminate knee on the neck. We can make it stricter for the use of force or the excessive use of force. We can hit pockets. But if your mind does not change and you are indoctrinated into a racist system and a racist profiling job, then you're just going to continue to target the community that you've been taught to target. Now, people want to argue and say there's no such thing as systemic racism in law enforcement, and that's not what this is. Let me give you some facts. Policing was informal in the North up until the American Revolution, and then it was formalized, but it was called night watch and day watch, just to make sure things were going all right with people's property and people's safety if they needed something. It was more social control, because the idea that crime existed was just not really there. There wasn't this real criminal justice system. But the southern states, closer to the ending of the American Civil War and their conceding, they created what they called a slave patrol. So slave patrol was initially set up to go out and capture, discipline, beat runaway slaves, to also discipline and beat slaves that were out of order or were violating certain slave laws, reading, writing. So that is what the name of their law enforcement was originally called, Slave Patrol. And then it was ramped up once they conceded. That's when they created rather quickly Jim Crow or slave codes, and that was the regulation of freed slaves. That was how law enforcement started in the South. That was what it was based on. It was to regulate freed slaves from, and that term is so ridiculous, but it's what it was, freed slaves on the laws that were only applicable to Black Americans who weren't Black Americans at that time. So that is how law enforcement is ramped up. So that is the foundation of our policing. So if we can't liberate the minds and change the minds of an entire system that's rooted in racism, then no reform is going to change that. So that also kind of kills this notion of good cop, bad cop as an even concept, because it's a system that's bad. So even a good cop, best case scenario, would have not put the knee on the neck of George Floyd and killed him, but at the suspicion of a $20 counterfeit bill, would have shackled him in handcuffs, threw him on the ground, and then carried him off into a cage. That would be the right thing to do. That's the right policing thing to do. And is that the community that we want? Is that the reform we're looking for? Just to make sure, instead of, I mean, he would be alive, but he would also be harmed in an unnecessary way that would really be designed to address poverty or drug addiction or mental health. Instead, we're going to shackle you like an animal and put you in a cage at the suspicion of a minor issue. And we see that evidenced in all sorts of killing of black people by officers, killing of people of color by officers. And we also see it in the peaceful apprehension of white citizens suspected of much more heinous crime, murder, double murder, triple murder. We apprehend them whenever we can, unless we are forced. We don't kill them. So I invite you to really consider this notion of reform rather than abolition. If we can't liberate minds and abolish this racist foundation of policing, then we can't liberate people. We can't reform this system, because there is no reform of a system until we liberate minds. And I just wanted you to think about that. Thanks.